still dealing with the subject of elders. And by the way, the next chapter also deals with elders in a more positive way. This particular lesson deals with some misunderstandings about the eldership. And as I mentioned last week, I think a lot of what is listed, particularly in this particular lesson, it's anecdotal. In other words, it's from his personal experience, and it's not anything. It's not anything that that I've really experienced to a great extent with regard to attitudes or misunderstandings about the eldership. And if you read ahead and you read through the rest of this lesson, I think there's some bad arguments about the eldership in this lesson, and we'll talk about those. Any book written by man is certainly subject to be wrong, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. And so we'll open up our Bibles and look at what he has to say about the eldership and its relationship to the church. He's again dealing from a negative prospect, and then the next lesson we may get into it deals with from a more affirmative aspect. And so, but I want us to think about on page 114, he talks about the difference that or the failure to make a distinction between civil leadership and church leadership, and that civil leadership has, for the most part, inherent authority in it, and that authority can be exercised by those who are in authority. And he makes, in the previous page, there are 3 texts that are given where Jesus is instructing the apostles with regard to their authority and their leadership, and he expressly makes a delineation between civil leadership and church leadership. He said, you know how the lords of the Gentiles, or the rulers of the Gentiles, lord it over them. He says, but it shall not be so among you. And so he talks about the apostles from the aspect of, you are not the lords over the church. There's only one Lord over the church, and Jesus is it. Now, that is not to say that the apostles did not have authority. We know that they did, and Jesus was expressed that they had authority. Whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. But that authority still arises and originates in heaven from the Lord. It's not something that they themselves determine. And so, but then even beyond that, I'm reminded of the account of the rich young ruler, where at the conclusion of that account, where the young man went away sorrowful, he says, how hard is it for those who trust in riches to enter the kingdom of heaven? And Peter makes a statement. He says, Lord, we have left all and followed you. So what do we get? That's in essence what he asked. Well, so what do we get? And Jesus said very expressly, said, you will sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, that's a position of authority. Now, it's a delegated authority. And again, it's an authority that arises out of Christ and is delegated by Christ. But I think Stroop tries to make the argument too much that there's almost no authority in the eldership. And he goes, as the old saying is, he's run past Jerusalem. He got so far away that when he came back, he ran past where he needed to be and went too far. And so there is inherent authority in the apostleship, and there is inherent authority in the eldership. And so I want us to just be clear about that. He talks about some anecdotal things here on 114. But I want to go down to the bottom of page 114 and go back to our understanding of civil versus church authority or positions, office, whatever. It says, when one is inducted into a civil office, he's authorized to perform acts which he could not do otherwise, and which, if done by one not empowered by the office, would be a violation of the law. All right, we understand that an officer of the law can do things that those that are non-officers cannot do. None of us are authorized to write a speeding ticket. And so, but an officer of the law is duly authorized to do that. All right? So by virtue of his office, there are things that he can do that we cannot do. It says, but in a marked contrast to this, one who has been appointed an elder is not empowered to do one thing that he could not have done before his appointment. Now, I will agree with that statement only up to the point, by the way, only up to the point that no one man has authority as an elder to do anything. In other words, the authority is not in the elder, it's in the what? It's in the eldership. That's right. The authority is not in the elders, but in the eldership as a collective or as a whole. And then now, moving down just a little bit into that same paragraph, about halfway down toward the right-hand side, it says his real power, all right? Where it says his real power. It says his real power as an elder is not derived from his appointment to the place or office of an elder, but must be acquired through the power of the Word of God in his life. And his appointment is a recognition of this power, and he must live it and teach it effectively to do the work of an elder. Now, I wholeheartedly agree with that. That a man who is appointed as an elder is simply being recognized as possessing the characteristics and the qualifications that are required of the eldership, and that his appointment does not authorize him to do anything alone that he could not do before he was appointed as an elder. And so I wanted to kind of make that distinction. All right, now at the bottom of that same paragraph, again, this, and I have no doubt that all of these things have transpired at some point in time where men have abused their place as elders to tell people what they can and cannot do. I reminded of an account where a man made a statement in an elders meeting that, and it had to do with the withdrawal fellowship, but he made it himself. He made it without any consult about the other elders. Or, matter of fact, I know of two specific cases where a single elder threatened to withdraw fellowship from one of the members as a matter of discipline without consulting the other elders. Now, that is an abuse of power. There is no authority for any elder to initiate discipline or withdrawal proceedings in and of himself more than any other member. And so that's the idea here in this bottom of this paragraph, talking about pulling rank in order to secure the respect. That's really not what it's about. What's going on here is pulling rank in order to demand submission. And there's a big difference between submission and respect. Now, respect can bring submission, but you can also be submissive apart from respect, right? I mean, anybody ever work for somebody that they didn't respect? Did you ever work for anybody that you did not respect? Well, sure you did. Did that mean you didn't have to do what they said? Well, no. Furman was in the military. I'm sure there was probably some guys he ran across through the course of his time in the military that he didn't respect. But they outranked him. And that settled the matter, didn't it, Furman? That settled it. The matter of respect was not the question, it was a matter of rank. And if a man approaches the office of the eldership as a matter of rank and not as a matter of respect, he's really lost his way. He's really lost his way. Because that's not what Jesus said of the apostles. And certainly we would not ascribe to an elder some type of rank that Jesus didn't even give to the apostles. The apostles were leaders. Their lives demonstrated their submission to the Lord, and they were worthy. They were worthy to be emulated. They were worthy to be listened to, worthy to be followed, simply on the basis of the lives that they lived. But there was still more than that. But I'm just saying that was the basis. That was the basis of their leadership. And so, so this idea of pulling rank is completely foreign to the concept of biblical leadership, particularly as it pertains to modern leadership in the church with regard to our elders. All right. Now, on the bottom of page 115, it says, "Some people have labored long and arduously to show that it is in order to speak of an elder as an officer of the church, or the place filled by an elder as an office." It says, "These are not biblical terms, and their use is nowhere justified by the words used in the original text of the New Testament." Now, the word office does appear. It appears in regard to the apostles in Acts chapter 1, in regard to the replacement for Judas. It says, "Let his office another take." The word there is the same one that you find in 1 Timothy 3. It says, "If any man desires the office of an elder." Now, with regard to what Stroop says, technically he is correct. There's not a word there that is translated office. That is a phrase that is rendered in regard to a single word, which is, if we were and some renderings do use this in Acts 1, bishopric. Bishopric. In other words, the place of a bishop. Yeah, the position. And so, to me, the idea of office versus position is just an argument over words. It's just an argument over words. You can call it a place, you can call it an office, you can call it a position. As long as we understand what it does and what it's supposed to do, then what we call it, to me, is of no consequence. Because that's just a matter of translation. There is no word for office. All right, I get it. But there is a word for place or position. And to me, that's a distinction without a difference. So far as when we understand what it is. Now, top of page 116. And this is one thing where he makes a real strong argument, and then he's going to give you back a little bit. He's going to pull this rope just as tight as he can, and then he's going to feed it. He's going to feed you a little bit back. It says, "However, in the view of the loose way in which we use words, this does not mean that these terms may never in any sense be used to speak of an elder or the place that he fills." So see, he's going to give back a little bit. It says, "For anyone who accepts such an appointment has been recognized as a spiritual leader and has been given a what? Place of special service." That sounds like an office. Kind of. Depending on how you want to use the terminology. A place of special service in the assembly or church. It says, "In this sense, the word office may be used, but never to indicate that by virtue of his appointment, he has been given a special power to exercise authority jointly with the other elders over the church." Now, here's where we're going to separate company. Earlier, we said that a man cannot use the office as an elder as an individual, right? He has no authority as an individual to do anything. But in this case, I think Stroop's overstepped it. Note he says that by virtue of his appointment, he has been, never to indicate that by virtue of his appointment, he has been given a special power to exercise authority jointly with the other elders over the church. Now, I think that's just patently false. I think it's patently false. Are there things that the eldership can do that the membership cannot do? Are there things that the eldership can do that the membership cannot do?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you an example. Eldership hire a preacher?
Yeah.
Can the membership hire one?
No.
Eldership fire a preacher?
Yeah.
Can the membership fire one?
No.
No, they can't. You see? And I think I gave you an example about how this functions in a very real sense when I told you that the preacher at Dixon, where Shelby attends, wanted to change roles with the church. He wanted to get out of the pulpit and do a different role with the church, which means what? Got to have a preacher. So you need a preacher, right? So now this is how most churches find a preacher, and it's about the absolute worst way to do it. All right? This is about the absolute worst way to hire a preacher. Get about 5 guys to come in on consecutive Sundays or over the course of 10 or 12 weeks and have 5 guys come in and preach and try out and then try to make a decision based on the 3 or 4 or 5 guys that you've all heard. That's the worst way in the world to hire a preacher, and yet that's how most congregations hire preachers. Right. Now, why is that a bad plan?
Well, the man gets up there and he preaches a sermon. I mean, he's going to try to do his best.
Right.
He's going to put it out like it is, maybe. I'm just assuming that. And then you have another come next Sunday, do the same thing. You did all 5, as you said. All right. Now, you got to remember what all of them said.
There you go.
Back up.
Yeah, the first guy really doesn't have a prayer, does he? The first guy on the list doesn't have a prayer. Unless he's like head and shoulders better than the other 4 guys. Are there other intangibles? All right, what's another reason it's a bad?
All right. You might be basing your choice off of likability instead of the man's background, what he stands for, and the length he's willing to go to preach the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Does he have a backbone?
Mm-hmm. All right. And who makes that determination? The church or the elders?
The elders.
The elders have to make that determination.
The congregation might vote on likability.
Right.
But it's the elder's responsibility to make sure that guy standing there is telling the truth to that congregation.
Right.
That fills their office or
there you
their
go.
purpose as, and I'm going to use the word you don't like, pastors. Right?
Yeah.
Because they feed the flock. And it's
You shepherds instead.
Okay,
More biblical.
shepherds. But you know what I'm saying. I did that just okay.
I know.
Because
And I love you for it.
I know. It's their responsibility that what is fed the congregation is true.
That's
and
right.
And profitable.
Mm-hmm. Or you could have 4 really good candidates, and 1/4 of the church wants one, and 1/4 the church wants one, and 1/4 the church wants one, and 1/4 the church wants the other.
Now you got division.
And now you got division.
Well, you could have one elder that just gives a job to his son.
I guess that's possible. Although I don't know how that would work, but
It works.
so in the situation where Shelby attends, they already had a guy in mind who had preached there many times, and so the elders decided the church knows this guy. We know this guy. He's a faithful gospel preacher. He's preached here before. We believe he'd be a good fit. Let's go talk to him and see if he's interested in moving. And he was. And so the elders got up one Sunday and said, "We've gone out. We've hired Brian to be, Steve's stepping into a different role, and we've hired Brian. We've hired Brian to be our new preacher." Seamless transition. So, but who does that? Who does that? The elders do it. The elders do it. And so the idea that the elders can't work in connection with one another to do things that the church cannot or the individual cannot, it's just patently false. John, can you schedule a gospel meeting for this congregation?
No.
You can't. Who does? The elders do. Yeah. And basically who's in charge of inviting? The elders. Now they entrust, our elders entrust me to go find good guys, but ultimately everybody that comes comes at the invitation of the elders. Right? So, none of us have the authority to do any of those things. And so, can elders set meeting times?
Yes.
Can members set meeting times? No. So there's a host of things that the elders do because the authority that is inherent in the eldership. Now I want to go. Excuse me. I want to go down to the bottom of page 116, and I'm going to show you in the time that we have left this morning some bad arguments that are in the book that I want you to be aware of. At the bottom of page 116 begins a biblical text, 1 Thessalonians 5, 12 and 13. It says, "But we beseech you, brethren, to know them that labor among you and are over you in the Lord." Now see the parenthetical phrase, take the lead? That's not in the biblical text. That's Stroop's interpretation. See where it says? It says are over, and he said over you, and he inserts take the lead. All right, and admonish you, and to esteem them exceeding highly in love for their works' sake. And then now, all through page 117 are some of the same verses that I've got written down here. 1 Timothy 3 and verse 4, 1 Timothy 3 and verse 5, 1 Timothy 3 and verse 12, and 1 Timothy, it may be 5:12, but look at 1 Timothy 3, 4, and 3, 5. 1 Timothy 3, 4, and 3, 5. Yeah, it's 3:4, 3:5, 3:12, and 5:17. I forgot to put the 5 there. Chapter 5, verse 17. Correct that in my book here. 3:4. Talking about the qualifications of an elder. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Same principle is found in 1 Thessalonians, but now Stroop's going to say the word rule there means take the lead. Again, that's his rendering. Then you got, let the deacons be husbands, verse 12, let the deacons be husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. And again, Stroop's going to say, well, it means take the lead. All right, I'm willing to accept that a man has to take the lead. But it's more than that, isn't it? A man has to do more than just take the lead in his household. I mean, as the old sign on Harry Truman's desk said, the buck stops here. Now, when the buck stops here, and somebody has responsibility and accountability, then there's a sense of inherent authority there. There's a sense of inherent authority. And so there's the word rule, rule, rule. And then chapter 5 and verse 17, let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. So that word rule is found once here in 1 Thessalonians 5, 4 times in 1 Timothy, 3 in chapter 3, 1 in chapter 5. Now, he kept throwing in the phrase, every time he'd quote the verse, he'd throw in, take the lead, take the lead, take the lead. So I started doing a word study. Guess what I never did find? Guess what I never did find in my studies? Take the lead. Let me tell you what I did find when I studied the word. To stand before in rank or to preside. To stand before in rank or preside.
Back here in chapter 3, in verse 10, I've made a note where it says use the office, and that can be used for either elder or deacon.
Right.
I have translate serve.
That's right. Yeah, serve. That's it. Serve. Now, one more on rule. Now that was from Strong's. I gave you Strong's. To stand before as in rank or to preside. Let me see here. Abbott and Smith lexicon. To put before, set over, preside, rule, or govern. Those are the words. You know, none of that sounds anything like take the lead. Right? And so he's allowed his bias on this thing to cloud his judgment on the presentation of the text. Now, I want you to turn on over to the bottom of page 119, because I want to get done with this lesson because there is a good transition into lesson 10 on the affirmative aspects of the eldership, and I want to get to that first thing next Sunday. On the bottom of page 119, at the very bottom, second line from the bottom, where it says, he's going to jump over to Hebrews 13. All right, 2 verses in chapter 13, 7 and 17. Here's 7. Now listen to the quote here. Remember them that had the rule over you. See the parenthetical statement? Your leaders. That's what he added. Men that spoke the word unto you, the word of God, considering the issue of their life, imitate their faith. Then, obey them that have the rule over you. And he inserts what? Your leaders. And submit to them. But to me, this is the catch. For they watch in behalf of your souls as they that shall give an account, that they may do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable for you. Now, Stroop going to try to make the argument that because the word elders is not in this text, it's not talking about elders, which is a terrible argument. It's a terrible argument. I want you to note, first of all, I want you to turn, if you write in your book like I do, I want you to turn back to page 119, and in the lower left-hand corner, you see that word had in the far left corner on the bottom. You circle that word if you write in your book, and you write the word present tense, have. All right? Right? Present tense, have. All right? Because over in, now back to page 120. Set into the second line at the top. Obey them that what? Have the rule over you. That's a different tense than the one he quoted before, right? Well, guess what? They're the same word. And they're the same tense. Both of those words in the original are in the same tense, the present tense. Have the rule. Have the rule. And the reason I mention that is when you get to about the middle of the second paragraph, it says, he quotes the phrase, had the rule over you, implies that they were not with them at the time of the writing. Well, it would if that was the correct rendering. But that's not the correct rendering. The word is have, present tense. Have the rule over you. Now, he's going to try to argue away. He's going to try to argue away again from the word rule. Okay? And so what I did, right there, it says in about 8 or 9 lines down in that second paragraph where it says, the same expression, rule over you, in the other 2 quotations is from the same Greek word that he renders your leaders. Your leaders. All right? Now, here's that word. Lead, command with official authority. Lead or command with official authority. Now, does that just sound like a leader by example only? Or does it sound like somebody who has authority? I mean, for example, President Trump is our leader, right? He is our leader. And he can lead in any number of ways. And by the way, he doesn't always do a really good job of it, right? But it's not a matter of being a leader or having authority. You can be a leader and have authority. Or you can be a leader without authority, right? I mean, in a classroom situation, kids can be leaders, right? Or on a football team or a baseball team, or in the military, in some kind of small collection of soldiers. There's always that guy that seems to be he's the leader of the group. That guys look to him. Now, does he have any authority? He don't have any authority. The guy on the football team doesn't have any authority. He's a leader. But Stroop is trying to make an artificial distinction between being a leader and having authority. It's not either be a leader or have authority. It's be a leader who has authority. But the emphasis, and I think it's fair to say, I think the emphasis for the eldership is not in the authority, but in the example. I think that's the real emphasis. I don't want to get away from that. The real power of the eldership is in the lives of the elders. That's where the real leadership exists. But that is not to say that they do not have authority. And I'll give you another one that I found. And this one came to me this morning while I was going back over this material. Where he makes a bad argument over this word rule. In John 3 and verse 36... it speaks of those who believe in the Son, but then speaks of those who believe not in verse 36. But some translations get it right where it says, obey not the Son. Because it's not the word for faith, it's the word for persuasive submission, or persuaded submission. And the word there is the same as the word rule, but it's got the word little a in front of it. Remember when we studied how the Greek language, and you put the letter a in front of a word, it means the opposite? Well, the word there for believe not or obey not in John 3:36 is the same word that we're studying right here. It's the same word we're studying right here, but it's got the letter a in front. So it's really obey not. Obey not. And so the word, when you start talking about the word rule, and it says, obey them that have the rule over you. I mean, there can be no question. About the fact that there is authority in the eldership. The last thing I want to mention is over on page 121, on the first full paragraph that begins with the phrase another expression. It says another expression in the same verse is submit to them, has probably encouraged the application to elders because of the preconceived erroneous idea that elders are local church rulers rather than leaders. Again, it's a false statement. It's not that they are leaders as opposed to rulers, or rulers as opposed to leaders. There is a sense in which the elders have the rule in the local church. Again, not either or, both and. Not either a leader or a ruler, but both a leader and a ruler. All right? And when I say ruler, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about exercising delegated authority. Exercising delegated authority. And so I just I thought he was trying to make too much of the argument to get away. And by the way, I think I mentioned this last week. One reason this kind of really hits home with me is because when I first got into ministry full time back in the early 90s, and I mentioned this to you, but I'm just going to, by way of reminder, to kind of tell you why I'm so passionate about it, is because there was a movement in the church that said elders only have authority by example, that they had no authority otherwise. And so I had to, that's one of the very first things I had to deal with in my full-time work, was people in the church that thought that the elders didn't have any authority outside of their example. So that's why this is kind of close to my heart. All right. So now lesson 10 next week. Lesson 10.